It's time for Trench Talk, where Joe Rogan meets metal and underground heavy music. I'm your host, FlightOfIcarus with MetalTrenches.com. As always, if you have not already, please do subscribe to the channel. Please do like and share if you enjoy the content, and consider hitting up our Patreon. But we should probably do kind of a proper introduction here. So
yeah, let's do it.
Yeah, so I'm here with Dustin from the Heavy Metal History podcast, which if you're enjoying the interviews that I'm doing here, then you will definitely want to subscribe to him as well, because very kind of similar format. I've really enjoyed listening to some of the episodes. I think the last one I listened to was Inanimate Existence, but I know you just put up a new episode, I think yesterday or the day before or something like that. So yeah, glad we were finally able to get together here.
Like 2 a week sometimes.
Yeah, man.
Yeah, man, I appreciate you having me on to talk about what we're going to talk about today, and hopefully we'll get some crossover between both our listeners to check out both podcasts.
Yeah, that's the hope. We got to build a community here. I was just talking with maybe I was talking with Chris, but speaking of Chris, so this will, I think, kind of be an extension of the episode I did with him where we talked about the Deathspell Omega album, because we thought it was really your idea, and I thought it would be interesting that we kind of talk more broadly sort of about, there's this whole kind of debate between people who are kind of like, you know, you can separate the music from the artist, and, you know, even if a musician did something really awful, you can still enjoy the music. And then there's people in the other camp who say, like, no, like, they're canceled, it's done, never go back to the music at all, don't promote it, things of that nature. And so, yeah, that's what we're gonna focus on today, I think.
Yeah, I think it's a pretty deep topic, and it's very much in the minds of a lot of people. And, you know, I'm just going to say it right off the bat, I'm entirely hypocritical about it too, because I have plenty of bands that I listen to that have done fucked up shit, and I still listen to them, but I don't support them. I don't put it out there. I'm not like, hey, you should check this band out. But then there's some that I'm just like, you know what? I don't want anything to do with your music. I don't want anything to do with you as a person. And that's kind of where I stand on it. But I just wanted to say up front, I am hypocritical about it.
Yeah, I think most people are. Like, it would, I mean, especially considering, and this was something that stood out to me about the whole thing, is that think about all the people who still listen to Michael Jackson. Yeah. And share Michael Jackson's music, or R. Kelly. And like, don't get me wrong, like, these people, like, I'd even say are very talented musicians. Like, I can't take that away from them. However, awful people who have done just the most terrible things you can think of. And it's hard to imagine, but it's just hard because I don't know. I have so many different thoughts on this, so I'm interested to get into it. I don't know if you had sort of opening thoughts.
Well, here's my two actual real life experiences that I can kind of relate to you about this. Because I did tour with a band for a number of years and had, I guess, encounters with people who were accused of things that I can see, I guess, like the problem, you know, because I was there and I witnessed some of the behavior. But the people that are kind of like defending them, I'm like, no, you shouldn't be defending them. So one, first off, is Decapitated. I 100% think they were guilty of what they were accused of. Having toured with them, they were kind of weird dudes, very creepy to say the least. And, you know, I never personally saw them with women when we toured with them, but I've heard stories on the other hand about them, like kind of doing the same kind of behaviors. And it's unfortunate that what happened. And I kind of think they're definitely guilty of it. And the second one is I toured with As LA Dying literally months before all the shit with Tim happened. And he couldn't have been he couldn't have been a more nicer guy. Like, so when that shit happened, my mind was just like, no, that's not Tim. There's no fucking way. Like, I've been battling with my own mental gymnastics on that for years. And, you know, now with them kind of making their comeback and, you know, having still kind of mutual acquaintances, it's like, no, Tim, he's definitely changed. He's definitely, made his amends. And on one hand, I definitely see that, and I'm kind of keeping up with it. But on the other hand, I'm like, man, he tried to like murder somebody. That's pretty fucked up. Like, how can you hate somebody so much, especially somebody that you supposedly loved at one point, that you want to murder them? Like,
yeah.
I don't know. But again, my personal interactions with him, he was such a cool dude. He was funny. He was nice, affable. Couldn't have been a nicer guy, but I don't know. Like, I don't know what drove him to that point. And it does seem like he's being very, very genuine about like trying to fix what he did.
Yeah.
So it's kind of hard to, I don't know, I guess not forgive him in a sense. Even though I don't know him personally, just more of an acquaintance. So those two things, like, I'm like, fuck Decapitated, but on the other one, I'm like, I'll give Asley dying a chance, I guess.
And that's what's so fascinating about all this to me, because I'm coming at it from very much like a mental health angle, because like I experience that on a daily basis. Like, if there's one thing that I've learned in my 10 plus years kind of working in counseling with families and kids and loved ones and all these different people, it's that both of those things can often be true, that somebody can be a loving, caring, cool person and also engage in some really horrific behaviors. And so it is hard. Like, I'd even venture to guess that there are probably people who know the guys from Decapitated who have the same feeling about them that you do about Tim, where they probably only saw maybe that cooler side or know them in a different way. And so it's tough. But I'm glad you're bringing up Tim, because I think that's one that has been weighing most heavily on my mind as somebody who's been a fan of As I Lay Dying since I was probably like 15 or 16, own all their albums, have very personal connections with all of them too. And in fact, I just posted a video today on like the cognitive triangle and how I see this kind of as an idea playing into the whole dynamic. And someone tweeted me back and was like, they still have, problems with what Tim did, and rightly so. And I'm really kind of just summarizing what was put into it. My response was sort of that, these albums have a very special meaning to me. And at this point, they're kind of like mine. And so whether he did it or not, I'm not willing to give up my love of those albums, because like to me, I feel like that's fundamentally wrong to like give something away. Like, it kind of makes me laugh and think about like the whole stuff with like the OK sign that's going on, or even at one point it got even more ridiculous, and it was like milk was like a white supremacist symbol, and I'm like,
my gosh,
how much are we gonna give to the white supremacists? Like, do we really want to just like give them things? Because like that doesn't seem right to me either. It's like, no, we need to take a stand and say this is ours and you can't have it. Like, that's the way I look at it. But that's just really the tip of the iceberg on my thoughts with Tim. But I agree with you. Like, I skeptically watched his recent video he put out. I forget which organization it was, but
yeah, I watched that too.
Yeah, and I thought it was very good. And I was like, okay, I'm not ready to just be all in and be like, okay, I forgive you and I think you're on the right path, but I'm interested. And, I'm curious to see where it goes. But again, as a mental health professional, especially as somebody who specializes in working with people who have been victimized by domestic violence, sexual abuse, various forms of physical abuse, what have you, I also think about his ex-wife and also his kids and what they're going through. And, is it okay for them to see this person still out there on stage, like getting accolades from an audience, and seeing him as potentially this monster? And I don't know kind of what's going through their minds right now, but I that's something I've been very interested in.
And I hope I'm not speaking out of school on this kind of subject, but she was around a lot on that tour we did. Like, she was at quite a few shows, and so was his children. And maybe this is just me kind of like putting stuff together in hindsight, but there were times where like, she'd be chilling in the back green room, not socializing with anybody, kind of looking maybe not scared, but just like something was off, but now I don't know if that's just me like putting that together
injecting
because of what
meaning
happened
into it. Yeah,
but like when he was around his kids, he seemed like a great dad. Like, he did some maybe like off-color stuff, like teaching his kid how to flip the bird just as a joke or whatever. And it was funny, like whatever, but I don't think he was like seriously teaching him like to do it in a hateful way. It was just like the kid did it on accident. And he goes, yeah, it puts up the middle fingers, and again, like these are just kind of personal things that happen in the back. And I don't want to like act like I know everything that was going on, but it's, you kind of try to put together these little puzzle pieces of what you experienced and then what happened afterwards. And I guess kind of like put together the whole puzzle, even though it may not be the right pieces. So I don't know if exactly she was like scared or whatever. It could have just been me being like, that's what I think happened now that, everything came out with what he did. But, she talked to people too. She was nice. And, these are just my experiences with him. And again, like I said, I don't want to sound like I'm talking out of school and making shit up or talking bad about Tim or anybody else. It's just, that's what happened on tour. So I'm just kind of relaying what I experienced on it.
Yeah. I'd really be interested. I think the bottom line is I feel like she deserves to have a voice in this, as the actual victim in this situation. So that was one thing missing from the video that I would have liked more of. I think he's going about it mostly the right way, in that he's like trying to get into social work and trying to, use his fame to actually help other people and prevent these things like this happening, which I think is a huge area of need because, there's so much focus on the victims and what they need. And absolutely, we need to help those people. But if we want to, in the long term, have fewer victims and have this happen less, we really need to be focusing on the offenders and potential offenders. And how do we, help them deal with like their anger or, whatever it is that they're dealing with that is leading them to engage in these types of behaviors. But again, all that said, she deserves to and really needs to have a voice in this if she wants to. Yeah.
That's what I've been wondering too, is if she even wants to. She might just kind of want to like
lay low,
distance herself. Yeah, because it's a tough thing to like be in that spotlight. I mean, even after he got convicted, there were so many people talking badly about her and like threatening her over the internet.
Yeah, which is terrible.
Like,
what? That's just awful.
Yeah, it's so ridiculous.
Yeah, I don't want to endorse that at
all. No, not at all. And even though, it's usually just people writing words, it's still gotta carry some weight, you can't just like say that shit about somebody just because you're heroes in a band. Like it's not right.
Yeah. But this brings me kind of to the broader topic at hand, though, is that, okay, so I think we all should have thoughts and opinions and be thinking critically about what happened. Mm-hmm. But there's still the kind of separate but connected issue of, okay, what do you do with the music, though, especially when it's new music? Because I know a couple websites have taken a stand at this point where they literally said, this is the last you'll hear us talk about As They Lay Dying. We're not going to promote them. We're not going to speak about them. And this is kind of how we even sort of got on this topic, too, was that a lot of sites, I wasn't even aware of the whole Deathspell Omega controversy until a few people brought it up to me. And I saw that a bunch of people refused to cover them. And then I also saw just the other day, Anthony Fantano did a review, and then he took it down. And my guess was that the same thing happened to him. Like a bunch of people came to him and were like, how could you promote this? And this is not okay. And are you aware of what Mikko's doing? And his decision ultimately was to take it down, whereas mine was to leave it up. And I have just a bunch of reasons for that. But kind of what thoughts do you, it seems like you're kind of in the camp of don't promote it, because you were one person who specifically, like on my Instagram, was like, why are you sharing this? Like, this dude is a bad dude, and we can't really separate out the music from that.
I think the main thing for me is that he's very, very, from what I understand, very involved in that kind of alt-right community wherever he's based out of. He actively like writes for things, perpetuating that kind of propaganda and stuff like that, which is really dangerous. But then you see him kind of infusing it into the music, and it's like, well, what are you trying to get out there? What's your message? Are you just trying to spread hate because that's what you believe, or are you doing it for, for lack of a better word, to be an edgelord? And I think he's doing it with actual malice. Like, I think he genuinely hates whatever, religions or colors of people or sexualities of people. I think he genuinely hates those kind of people, and he's putting it into the music lyrically. And that's a dangerous thing, I think.
I think it is to an extent, but I'm also like I'm very anti-censorship. I'm very much a free speech advocate. And I have problems with, this is different in that, like, nobody's saying, like, you can't write this stuff. But, to an extent, it's sort of becoming that way. Because there are groups that take it beyond what you did. Where I appreciated what you did, where you just kind of shared your opinion that, like, hey, I wouldn't agree with sharing this. But there are some people who will, like, then boycott a venue or, an outlet or whatever and try to destroy it. And to me, that's like impinging too much kind of, it's going into the realm of what I described as like the Tipper Gore era. Like, it really reminds me of that, because when I think about, like, that all went down with so much heavy metal and, death metal, it's like death metal, their lyrics are very much about violence and death and murder even. And so on some level, I'm like, okay, is this different? And some people say, well, it absolutely is. But, and I think there's an argument there. But at the same time, I'm like, but is it though? Like, these people are writing lyrics about straight up murdering people and like torturing them. And that's part of why, there were so many sort of evangelical groups that were dead set on censoring them. And I feel like at that time we were kind of all on the side of like, these people need to get the stick out of their ass and just recognize that this is just music and it's just entertainment, and we're not going to listen to this and go out and kill people. And I feel somewhat the same way about even those types of lyrics that we're talking about now, because nobody's going to listen to those lyrics. Let me qualify that. Nobody in their right mind is just going to hear those lyrics and go out and commit a hate crime. Now, there are people out there that we've seen cases of, and it may be from a violent movie, it may be from violent music they were listening to, whatever, where they did use something they heard or saw as an inspiration for their ultimate act. But in all of those cases, that person already had so many other factors going on for them. I'm literally hearing like, Eminem lyrics playing in my head right now as I'm saying this, where it's, they blame it on Marilyn and the heroin. Where were the parents at? Like, that's kind of where I'm at with this, is that people who go out and commit terrible acts that I just want to be 100% clear on, I do not condone, hate crime and violent acts towards anyone, lest, whether it be towards a specific group of people or whatever. But at the same time, I'm just kind of in this place of, lyrics are subjective too. Like, you take lyrical meaning into it any way you can. And I was really interested to hear Fantano's review. Actually, I'm glad I heard it before he took it down, because he came at it very much the same perspective I had, where I didn't already have, kind of going into like what you're saying too, like with your thinking about Tim's ex-wife and how, like, am I injecting into it just my thoughts on it based on what I know now? Because when I listened to it without that context, I was very much looking at it as kind of a satirical look on, somebody who's really kind of preaching about something that we shouldn't want, almost like a cult leader kind of situation. And it was very like poking not just fun, but hate at like religion in general and just where society has gone. And that was very much the same reading that Fantano described in his review. And I was like, okay, I'm not crazy. Like, you can take that subjectively from it. And I also see, having seen all this stuff about Mikko now, although I hear he's not even actually the one who's writing the lyrics, but in any case, like, I could see how it takes it a step further given the full breadth of kind of what he's been doing in his spare time, so to speak. So I'm struggling with this. Like, I'm not, I hate people that are in the extreme camp also of like, well, no, it's just music and I'm just okay with it and I don't care what Mikko does. Like, I think that's too far too. I think we should struggle with this a little bit, but I guess I'm still somewhere kind of in the middle ground.
I think for me, it's not a matter of like wanting to shut it down or go to that extreme place of like threatening venues and stuff like that. I personally just choose to not listen to it and not support it. That's all. And that's the end of it for me. Like, I don't feel the need to go any further. It's just like, you know what? I'm done with it. So
yeah, and that's fine. Like, I think that's a perfectly healthy thing to do, to just decide that this isn't for me. Personally, I don't want to support it. And yeah.
And I mean, even on the broader spectrum, a guest that I've had on my podcast was accused pretty damningly of some sexual assault stuff. And I took his episode down immediately because I did not want to be associated with it. I didn't want people to like think that I was, okay with what happened and what he was accused of. And, I just left it at that. I didn't really talk about it much. I just took his episode down and was like, I don't want to support this, which sucks because it was a really good guest. It was somebody who doesn't do a lot of interviews. And I was just like, well, fuck, of course that would happen. And now, again, it's one of those things where one side of the band is, yes, this guy did this. And he's like, fuck you, I'm out of the band and I'm taking the name with me. I didn't do this. And now it's like, well, which side do you support? And I don't, whatever happens with the name in the band, I want to support the side that's, not accused of the sexual assault. And, I mean, even getting back to Mikko and Deathspell, like I listened to them forever, like for years, up until I think about whatever their last album was. And that's when I kind of found out what he was involved with. And I was like, well, I don't want to listen to this anymore. And I just haven't.
Yeah. And honestly, that was what made me a little bit cynical about it too. Like, because I remember when Synarchy of Molten Bones came out and everybody was raving about it and nobody was really talking about this on the front lines. And I even checked to make sure that my perspective on that was correct. And I noticed that Fantano still has a review of that, I believe. There's a whole bunch of mainstream outlets with their reviews up on that. No mention of the controversy whatsoever. But assumably this stuff has been going on predating that quite a ways. Oh, yeah. And so part of me I'm so burned out on the whole like Antifa scene, cancel, #cancel, like so many stories where some of them are true and some of them aren't, and it's hard to disseminate it. And I think I've just gotten so numb to that I was just like, well, okay, the timing just seems weird to me that like now we're all going to talk about this, and maybe it's just because it's just in the air and that's why it is. But I think that added on to it as well, as whereas just a couple years ago, I probably would have been in the camp of immediately just being like, oh wow, like I don't want to be associated with that. Whereas now I think I'm less so that way. Like, and that's the funny thing about all this is my problem with taking things down and removing them is it kind of feeds into, have you heard the Streisand Effect?
No, I have not.
It's like the more you try to conceal something, the more it gets in the public eye if people are already aware of it. And the more people seek out information on it, and the more it like grows into something even bigger than if you hadn't done that. And the reason it's called the Streisand Effect is I guess there was this whole thing where Barbara Streisand like had this huge like sprawling house that she didn't want really people to know that she was living such luxury. I'm probably getting details of this story wrong, but the basic idea is that she didn't want people to really know about it, but people did know about it. So as a result, people just went digging for that information even more and got pictures of it and were hassling her even more. And it blew up into this bigger thing. And I see this play out in a number of different ways in the video that I just put out today, or as the time that people will be listening to, as it'll be a couple weeks back. But it was again on kind of the cognitive triangle and how our intercommunication with people adds to the situation. And I think going back to what you said too, is that some of these people, not all of them, but some of them are edgelords. Like I feel like black metal by design is like an edgelord genre, like that. It's I think transcended that now with a lot of bands, but that's sort of the origin of black metal, is how can we be as dark and shocking as possible and beyond even what we're hearing from like death metal. And so to me, I'm like, let's imagine that like that is what Mikko is, because I think a lot of bands are doing that, where they're recognizing that people are so numb to violence and murder and gore and all that because they've heard it a million times before, that's no longer shocking, and they still have that passion for shocking people. So hey, what are people shocked about right now? And guess what? Like, anything sort of racially motivated, and all that kind of imagery is very much in the zone right now of, oh, we can't say that, we can't talk about that. So I think some of these bands are purposefully, even if they don't believe in it, whether you agree with it or not, they're latching on to it as the new way to get that old shock value in. And so I think when you try to bury that, when you try to push that off and everybody like shuts down and says, oh, we're not going to review that, we're not going to talk about it, or you do review it and then you take it down, oftentimes what I see play out is that ultimately feeds their agenda. And you're actually kind of like playing into exactly what you didn't want to, because now they're like this even bigger, more mysterious entity. And I see that kind of happening with Deathspell too. Like, I think they're going to actually have even more of this intriguing atmosphere that could potentially draw even more listeners to it, because it's like we don't talk about that. We don't touch that. That's like too extreme. That's too far out there. And that's exactly the type of stuff that like metalheads gravitate towards in a lot of cases. Is like they're sick of especially younger metalheads. Like, I know for me, the more something was like, it had the parental advisory sticker, which is the whole irony coming out of the whole Tipper Gore area too, is like that became like a badge of honor. And, the more something was like, no, you can't listen to that, you can't watch that, you can't do that, the more, as an idiot 16-year-old with a underdeveloped frontal lobe, I was drawn to it and was like, oh, I want to check that out. Like, what's that all about? This is intriguing. And then potentially then you get the wrong kid who is already struggling with like trauma or some sort of stuff that's going on at home, and they turn it into their own subjective doctrine and carry out problem behaviors. So I think that's sort of my overall problem with the other side of it, is the more you try to like stamp something down, the more it ultimately grows.
It's it's a hard thing too, because like it makes you wary to want to check out certain bands, because you never know if something's going to pop up here in like 2 months of like, especially black metal. Black metal is just, they have a target on them right now so hard, and it's like, well, how do I know what to check out or listen to, that in 6 months they're not going to be accused of being a Nazi or whatever. And it sucks, because like I don't like limiting myself on that aspect, like not checking something out, but I also don't want to like put it out there and support it, and then 3 months later somebody be like, oh, this band's full of Nazis, why did you post about it? And I'm like, fuck, I didn't know. Like, how could I have known? It's just now coming out. And like I said, I wouldn't put it out there if I didn't agree with like their ideals. But on the other hand, there's things where you have like these legendary bands that were around back in the day, where it comes out later that, oh yeah, this member was supposedly a white supremacist or whatever. And it's like, well, shit, what do you do now when the band's already been around for 30 years? Yeah. And they've kicked him out, like that member's not even in the band. So why are you talking about it?
Yeah.
And I like that too, when bands take action and they're like, okay, this person needs to go. We don't want them in here because of all this, flack or heat or whatever. So it does make it a little bit harder to check out certain genres of music, but I still try to and keep it on the down low until I've done my research and been like, all right, everybody seems on the level in this band.
But I mean, it the bottom line is that like you can never know. Like, it goes back to what I was saying before. Like, people are complicated. Like, people aren't. It's not like the movies where people are, all evil. Or like, 100% the hero good. Like, we're all kind of somewhere in between there. We all have certain avenues. Like, even you look at history of, I'm fascinated by serial killers, because again, I'm always looking at the question of, okay, why did they do this? Which is why I was so fascinated by the Mindhunter series, especially because I'm getting chills just thinking about it, because I'm so fascinated by it, and I'm so passionate about people like that that step away from like, okay, we're spending too much time focusing on what they're doing and not enough on why they're doing it. And so that's another reason why I think it's good to have, those interviews out there, those discussions out there, the disseminating of albums, or talking about the people or whatever, interviews with like the serial killers too, because like someone might argue like, how are you going to give a serial killer a platform? But to me, I'm like, how else are you going to figure out like what makes them tick and what's going on with them? But the other thing I was getting at is that a lot of these serial killers, you'll find is that there were certain avenues of their life where they were totally upstanding citizens. I mean, Ted Bundy worked for a crisis hotline, and there's like a whole book from someone who worked with him who said he was like really good at it, and probably ended up ultimately helping a bunch of those people, oddly enough. And then BTK was like, I think he was like a Boy Scout leader. And and some of these people obviously used that also to like get access to victims, but in some cases like it was completely separated from what they were doing. And so again, it just brings me back to like, even the worst of people have some side of them that is still capable of doing good. And so that's also why I kind of advocate against talk around like going back to Tim. I agree with the argument of like, we're not sure about him, we're not going to welcome him with open arms, but I disagree with a full stop mentality of Tim can't change, he is what he is, he can never be redeemed. Because what happens is that you have that mentality and you back that person into a corner where it's like, well, nobody's going to accept me anyways, and hopefully they're so upstanding and so redeemed that they'll just say, well, I'm just going to do what's right for the sake of doing what's right, even though no one's going to thank me for it. But the reality is most human beings aren't that way. If they're backed in a corner and feel like, well, nobody's going to recognize all the work I've done to be a better person, so why bother? And then they just end up leaning into it. And I see this with kids all the time in particular, where they've been so labeled as like the bad kid and, the troublemaker, that they say, okay, well, if I'm the troublemaker, you're going to fucking see a troublemaker. Like I'm about to make your life a living hell. And it really is, it gets to that psychological level, and it's a problem.
Okay. Yeah. So with what you were just mentioning with like, kind of looking into people's motivations behind, their actions and stuff, but also seemingly being like normal, good people on the front or the outside. It's like, I think it seems like, like you mentioned, everybody is complex human beings, obviously, and we all kind of struggle with like maintaining this outward appearance to everybody else, but, struggling with our own shit on like the internal level. So it's like, if you're having like intrusive thoughts or, murdering people on the side, like you can't just come out and be like, yeah, I murder women and bash their heads in,
Yeah.
But I mean, the people that want to look into that and see the reasons why, I appreciate that too, which is kind of why I think, even though it's just, people can look at it and be like, it's just music, who cares? Why do you have to look into, what these people's actions are? Well, they make an art form. I think it's worth kind of maybe like if I could get in touch with Tim again somehow and ask him, like talk to him about everything, I would like it.
Yeah.
To maybe give me some kind of like closure, perspective on it. And
I've even been thinking I would have him on here in a second just to be direct about that too. Like I wouldn't be easy on him, but I think it would be good for people to actually in a non-edited video kind of get a little bit more perspective on kind of what's going on with him.
Yeah. And, even like you mentioned earlier, there's a couple things you mentioned with like early black metal and stuff. I think you made an excellent point, because the one thing that people always kind of forget is all those guys that started that Norwegian black metal scene, they were kids. Yeah. They were like 18 to 21 years old. I think of all the dumb shit that I did when I was 18 and 21. Of course I would have been an edgelord. I would have found like the most heinous fucked up thing I could and been like, haha, this is cool, this is funny, this is edgy. But I mean, it would have been in a non-serious manner. I wouldn't have been like preaching Nazi symbols everywhere and being like, yeah, I believe in this. This is what we're about. It's more of just, I agree with your sentiment that it's just for shock value in some sense, especially the early days of black metal. But even then, you have Varg, who is a very well-known racist and, you know, not a good dude. I mean, his YouTube channel just got shut down, thankfully, finally. And I think that's good that they shut it down. Even though there was some videos, like I legit watched some of his videos about like the history of black metal and, you know, his part in it, even though it was just from his perspective. I did find it really interesting for him to kind of explain what was going on around that time. But everything else where he's like preaching about, you know, religion and Jewish people, I'm like, why? Like, stop, dude. Who cares? Like, I'm not about to watch that.
Yeah.
So again, it comes down to me being a little bit of a hypocrite because I did watch some of his videos, but also I'm glad that his channel got shut down. Like, he doesn't need an outlet. He's had one for years. Even when he was in jail, he was still allowed to like write blogs and fill it with all this hateful shit. And it's just like, why? What is deep within your heart and your mind that you hate another human being so much just because of their religion or skin color? Like, it's so silly to me. I can't look at another person and hate them for something like that. I just don't care enough.
Yeah. I have a lot of thoughts on that, but I have three major ones. And I'm in the camp where, like, I totally agree with you. Like, I think it's beyond me to truly understand the mentality of somebody who like singles out specific groups of people to hate on them and wish them to have bad things happen to them or actively go out and engage in that. And at the same time, I was in the camp of, I didn't feel like his channel should be shut down because I find it, again, intriguing to be able to actually see him in an avenue where he's expressing himself in a way that he feels very free to. And that allows me to kind of really see, again, what makes him tick and gain a better understanding of kind of where this person's coming from. And also, again, it brings me back to that idea of, you know, if people are allowed to express themselves, I think they're in a safer boat, actually, than the people who feel like they've been shut down and backed in a corner and have been marginalized. And I mean, we've seen that, like a lot of these school shooters and other people who have engaged in violence very much came from that place where they felt silenced and they felt like nobody listened to them and nobody would hear them out. And that's why... And I'm sorry to the listeners that I keep bringing him up, but he's like the closest thing that I have to a hero these days is Daryl Davis, who I don't know if you've heard of him, but he's got like a Netflix documentary about him. He's done a TED Talk. I still need to put up the link to that in the video I did. But in any case, he's this black blues musician who has spent a good part of his life going out and befriending KKK members. And through that friendship, through listening to them, he's had multiple high-ranking KKK members give up their robes and leave the KKK. And I just find that so inspiring. And that's been my experience in learning about mental health and working in mental health, too, that sometimes I walk into homes where the families legitimately, like, hate their kids and maybe even are hateful towards other groups of people. And it's so easy to, and I used to when I first got into this field, align with the kid against them and get very contentious about that and very much take this perspective of you're a bad parent and you're a bad person and you're not going to do this to this kid. And I think a lot of us go to that very defensive, protective place. But what I found through my work is that when I did that, I always lost the case because at the end of the day, they were still going home to those parents and then the parent wasn't going to change, the kid wasn't going to change, and I was ultimately allowing that hurt to continue with that child. Whereas now, I love working with those parents the most, oddly enough, because I've learned how to go into those homes where that caregiver is so used to everybody pointing the finger at them and shouting at them and giving them looks and making it their fault. And then I come in and I go, you know what? Parenting's hard. Like, this is really tough. The world is hard. Like, and tell me more. Like, tell me more about what's going on. Like, why is your kid driving you crazy? Why are these, different groups of people driving you crazy? Why do you hate this? Why do you hate that? Like, tell me more. I'm interested. And showing them genuinely that I actually want to listen. And I just shut up and I give them space to talk. And through that, I'm ultimately able to get to a place where we form an alliance. And I say, okay, I get that. And at the same time, we also need to factor in these elements. So how do we account for both of those? How do we get to a place where your needs are being met and your sons or your daughters or, whoever, their needs are being met too? And I think that's a lot of what Daryl Davis is doing as well, is he's kind of disarming them and allowing them to feel heard and taking them to a place where they actually change. And I think that's such proof of that people can change no matter how far, almost no matter how far they've gone. I do think there are some people in history that probably are maybe beyond saving. I especially think of the guy from Lost Prophets, who I just think is the embodiment of evil. But even him, I actually, that Shinobi versus Blue Dragon or whatever, that song came on in my car the other day, and I was like, man, this was such a fucking jam back in the day, but I can't listen to it without thinking about what an utter scumbag that guy is, and that's an understatement. But anyways, point being that people can change, even when they're in that situation. And so again, I am just anti trying to silence people and back them into a corner, because I ultimately think that's more dangerous. And I think that bringing them out and giving them more avenues to speak, not just openly where they can just kind of say whatever, but with people who are willing to listen and still challenge them, I think that's the best place for discourse to happen. So that's just point one, but I said a lot, so I'll let you respond to that.
Well, I agree with you on that sentiment. If I were to talk to somebody that had an opposing view, I would actually want to listen to them and figure out why it is they think that way, instead of telling them that they're wrong and blaming them for it. Because who knows, maybe in the course of that conversation, I could change their mind, or they could change my mind, who knows? So I think I've heard a bunch of stories. I think now that you mention it, about that guy and, being on Reddit or whatever, they get passed around. So that's cool that, having a discourse like that could change somebody's mind. And I think that with metal in particular, it's probably a little bit harder, because there's people latch on these emotions to music, like you mentioned, that song from Lost Prophets, it was a thing. It has a nostalgic thing for you back in the day, but it's hard to listen to it because you know who it's associated with. It's like that weird cognitive dissonance of trying to separate yourself from it. And sometimes it's just too hard to do that, because it's just not the same anymore. It's tainted. And, so speaking of that, what do you feel about other bands that have been accused, not necessarily of racism, but of child pornography or whatever, like Manowar and Inquisition? I feel like that's a pretty hard line. You shouldn't support those guys. Even now, I think it's honestly kind of fucked up. Even though they kicked him out of Manowar, I don't know, man. It's just weird that they didn't know or couldn't have known. I don't know. It's a weird thing. I don't think that people should still be supporting them. But then again, they weren't the ones that did it. So I don't know. It's a weird, and I also don't like Manowar in general.
Yeah, so me neither. That wasn't a hard one for me. Yeah, that one I was kind of like, oh, whatever. I'm not a Manowar fan. I'm still not a Manowar fan. But yeah, it is. I mean, that topic I think is especially hard for people. And again, I work with, people as young as 8 years old who have been, sexually abused and have even been trafficked and involved in child pornography and stuff. And it's horrific. It's really awful. And I've also worked with young people who usually as a result of their own experiences are now becoming burgeoning, being on the other side of it, where they're becoming the victimizers. And so I've learned a lot about how that rewires your brain and complicates kind of your arousal. And also there's kind of this labeling piece of it too, because I've found that a lot of these young men thought that because they became sexually aroused when they were being abused, thought that meant that they liked it or that it was okay. And that was very confusing to them. And so a lot of it was just explaining to them hey man, your body, when it thinks it's going into reproduction time, it just does that. That's not a conscious thing that you did. So sometimes especially if you can catch them young, I've worked with so many kids who have those kind of early problem sexual behaviors, and even just being able to explain that, and again, allowing them an avenue to feel comfortable talking about it, so that they can get the help that they need, they can get better. So I think that plays into it when I see these incidents. Now, I always am careful to say, like, I don't make excuses for behavior. I just make explanations. So if somebody breaks the law, if somebody ultimately does victimize someone, then I think that they should have the full extent of the law thrown at them. They take whatever consequences that they take, which is something I factor in with, this is not sexual abuse again. Going back to Tim, though, like he served his time. He went through all the court proceedings and everything. And so I think that absolutely needs to happen. And at the same time, that's always in the back of my head, though, is like, man, that sucks, because I'll bet there's a reason why they did that. And again, that's not me saying, well, I should still support them and they shouldn't be punished. It's more so like, what could have been done earlier? How can we prevent this from happening again? But I guess more simply to your question, like, would I continue to support their music? It really just depends. Like, like, I would even say, if somebody did that, but then they like came out kind of the way that Tim has and are like, okay, we're gonna, don't do charity shows to like agencies that help victims of sexual abuse or whatever, and I would still be open to it. Like, I don't know. It's a tough one. As for would I still listen to their old stuff too? I still would, because again, like, I have a personal connection with that stuff that goes beyond like me. For me, a band is like less of an issue because I'm more about the music itself, and it like takes on a completely different, it's like it's mine again. Like I was saying, it's my music at this point. And so even like, I always give the Cosby Show as an example too, because I grew up with the Cosby Show and I have such a personal meaning attached to that show. And I'm so angry with Bill Cosby for sullying that and being such an awful person and doing the things that he did. And at the same time, sometimes I do like want to go back and watch old episodes of that, not because like I'm passionate about Bill Cosby, but because I'm passionate about what the meaning those episodes had for me and what was going on in my life at those times. And so it's hard to separate those things out. So yeah, it's not really a solid yes or no.
Yeah. And I mean, he is serving his time right now. So that is, I guess, somewhat of an upside. But yeah, I mean, it's hard, man, especially with music. Like the two big ones for me are the Smiths and Swans. Morrissey is a very open kind of, I guess, alt-right guy. I don't know what to call him, but anytime something
I think
comes
that
up in the
term
news
gets
with
thrown
him,
around so much too. It's hard. I'm cynical about that too.
Yeah, I'm not into sides, but he's not very, I guess, politically correct. I don't know. But he's definitely involved with hating people of color and religions. That I know for sure. So every time he pops up in the news, I'm like, oh, it's probably not something good. And sure enough, it's never good. But I love the Smiths. I love some of his solo albums, and it's music and songs that kind of touch me on a personal level that I relate to. And Swans, that guy was accused of sexual assault. Nothing ever happened from it, but it's still out there, and it's still, I want to believe the accuser as much as the guy that was accused of it. And I don't know. I like his music. I think that he's been kind of like a, I don't know, trailblazer to some extent. Yeah. With a lot of stuff he's done. But it's unfortunate that now there's kind of like that, I don't know, cloud over it where it's like, well, yeah, he probably did sexually assault this person and he just kind of got away with it because there was no proof. It had been so long. Who knows? Yeah. It's hard. I don't know.
And it gets even more complicated. I get angry with people who make the false accusations because there have been plenty of those, unfortunately. And I hate that because, again, working with real victims, it's like it cheapens so many factors of what they've been through. And it also makes it harder for them to come forward. And it makes the whole thing much more muddled and complicated. So there's been so many cases of people just making up stories, and that's not good either. And it makes it so hard because I want to just be in the camp of, okay, someone comes forward and says this happened, then it probably happened. But now because of these people who have, for their own reasons, come up with bogus claims, it's muddied the waters. And now I'm like, well, I don't know. Like, I don't know what to think. And, we hope that the law does its due diligence and, convicts the right people. But the fact is that doesn't always happen. So it leaves us in this even more ambiguous place. It also makes me think too, what you're saying about another one of my 3 points I wanted to make. It was one Chris brought up in the Deathspell episode, is that it's important to factor in context. And again, not as an excuse, but just to better understand where especially these more kind of racist ideologies are coming from. Because when you've got people that are in like Scandinavia, and it makes me think too, like, although, like you were saying, like, if you came up in black metal, you'd probably try to do the darkest, edgiest stuff you could think of, but you wouldn't be like engaging in like Nazi propaganda. But you got to recognize that a lot of these kids are growing up in a very white area. Like they don't even have like access to people who look different from them. And so I think because of that othering, there's another level to that where like they don't feel the fallout of that as much, because like there aren't really people around them to sort of challenge them on that, and they don't feel the discomfort because they're not experiencing it face to face on a daily basis. And so I think, and then also just, what messages are they growing up with? You don't come out of the womb with like, you hate black people or you hate Jewish people. Like that's something you evolve with over time and are usually taught by other people and, the households they're in. But it is something that can be unlearned. So again, like I'm in favor of like, all right, you were also saying like, I think it's harder in metal. And I think to an extent, musically, I agree with what you're saying, but I also argue that the metal community, so with the whole Goat Moon patch situation, like, I feel like when you kick somebody out of a show for that, it just further creates resentment. And it's just like, man, these people don't understand me and they're fucked up and whatever. And then they get backed into like their own community of people who feel the same way and are like, yeah, man, those people, they just don't get it and blah, blah, blah. And now you're in like this echo chamber where you're only getting fed ideas from more people who may share some, I doubt that person even had that kind of ideology, but let's just say that they did. Now they're like stuck in this bubble where they're only talking to those types of people. I just feel like a better way to handle that situation, and a way that the metal community could present opportunities for, is I might have seen the patch and been like, hey man, I'm going to buy you a beer. And like, we like sit down and like, start drinking, start talking, whatever. And then I get onto the conversation of, so what's up with the Goat Moon patch? And like, not in like a judgmental, like, what's up with the Goat Moon patch kind of way, but just like, tell me what that's all about. And that engaging in that same way of like getting them to start talking, feeling comfortable with me. And then that gives me more of an avenue to be like, I also have some problems with it. Like, is it cool for us to talk about that? I feel like that is just a potential place where something new could happen. And I've had plenty of times in my life where things like that did happen, where I changed my mind on something. I was never into white supremacy, but, some people are. For some people, that's their bag. But, people in that avenue are more likely to change. Whereas, again, if they feel like they're being judged, and again, it just goes back to the basic idea of a lot of people when they first become metalheads, part of that is this feeling of, I don't belong in the normal society. I don't belong in typical culture and people don't get me. And the more people like mock you for your tattoos or your band shirts or the music you listen to or the way you dress or whatever, the more you get like backed into that. And I think that's a potential problem for handling people who may have connections to bad things like white supremacy, that we could potentially be creating a bigger problem when we think that we're making it better.
Yeah, that situation was really weird. I don't think that the security guard should have been allowed to do that. He could have talked to the venue owner or the promoter and had them taking care of it. But for him to like straight up accost that guy and give him an ultimatum of take off your vest or you can't go on the show, that's too far. Like he had no right to do that at all. Like that's one of those things where I'm like, you're taking it too far. Like you could have just said something about it and maybe mentioned it to him, or just ignored it like everything else. Because I'm sure if he would have went through that venue, he could have found like 3 to 10 other patches with some kind of, relation to,
it's like the 7 degrees it's like the 7 degrees of Kevin Bacon sometimes.
Yeah. So like, I think that guy, the security guard, was completely in the wrong. He had no right to do that. And he's just, no offense, but he's just a security guard. How can he make decisions to just kick somebody out based on a patch? Like it should be up to the venue owner or promoter. Yeah. Period.
And plus, that person's not there to necessarily cause trouble. But the thing is, if they do start causing trouble, guess what? Now you have a reason to kick them out. Because I'm all in favor of that. If someone's getting rowdy, if somebody's actually harassing somebody directly, if somebody's creating violence, like, then by all means kick them out. But if they're just there wearing something, like, I feel like, again, you're creating a longer term problem if we're just moving in a direction of, okay, now you're just not permitted, you've been outcast. Because guess what? That person's not going away, and they're also not getting kicked. I think some people have it. I think it's 2 things. I think one, it's just we get like a dopamine release, and it feels good to kind of get that instant gratification of, that person I didn't like, they just got theirs. And, I get that. And also, I wonder if some people think that, like, well, if we just punish them enough, then we'll like punish them out of the behavior, which research has shifted and shown that that's really not the case at all. That person's not getting kicked out of the club and going, well, guess I need to abandon my ideology. It's like, no, they're going in even deeper, even harder in most cases. And I think if people even look at it from a common sense lens, like, and look at their own lives, like, how many times did somebody like just, try to punish you out of doing something that you like doing? Did that work? Chances are it probably didn't.
Yeah, I have a whole relationship based off that. Excuse me.
Yes. We've all had those.
That story too, like, from what I understand, is that guy was genuinely like upset that he got kicked out too, because he said he wasn't there to make trouble. Like, from what I read, like, he was just kind of sitting on the street, like, upset about it, and was there to just enjoy the show. But who knows? That's one of those things where it's like 2 sides of the story. Where's the truth? Maybe he was causing trouble. Yeah. And that's why, the security guard said something and used that patch as an excuse. I don't know. I wasn't there, but I do think that it probably was taken a little too far, especially over a patch.
Yeah. And that's the thing. Like, just, I'm not saying ignore it. I'm not saying you have to be okay with it, but I am saying, like, you need to be thinking about a solution to your problem that is not going to potentially exacerbate the situation and is just not okay. Like, I just don't agree with doing things that way. The third thing I wanted to bring up that I think is kind of ironic about all of this is that it's perfectly okay within metal culture to constantly, viciously bash on Christians and Catholics. Like, there are literally songs. There's a Behemoth song about Christians to the lions. Like, I mean, we're literally talking about feeding Christians to lions, which was a historical thing that happened. So it's not even like made up. Like, there are so many songs in that vein. So part of me, and again, like, I am not against any religion, particular group of people or whatever, but I still think it's ironic to be like, okay, it's okay for us to shit on the Christians and Catholics, but we're drawing the line at Islam and Judaism. That fundamentally just doesn't gel for me, because I'm like, how is that really different? Like, actually different?
I think for me, I'm not religious at all, and I'm actually very anti-Christian and whatever. But I think the other side of it is it comes from my ignorance of not knowing anything about Jewish or Islamic faith. So I can't speak to like what kind of evils that they've done. But I'm very well aware of like Christianity and all their crusades and, the Catholic Church and their horrible abuse practices that they've perpetuated for generations and gotten away with. So in that respect, I'm like okay with bands talking shit about Christianity and Catholicism. It doesn't bother me. I think it's evil shit. but I also don't know enough about Judaism to sit here and, have a band talk shit about them. So it's kind of like my own ignorance on that. So I don't know if I'm in the right or wrong there. It's just like, I don't know anything about those other religions.
Yeah. Well, and the thing is, like, I grew up in a Christian household, and this is not me like getting contemptuous and being like, well, they shouldn't, rip on the Christians. I'm actually quite the opposite. I think everyone should be fair game. And I think if we can tear into the Christians, then we absolutely should tear into these other religions, because the reality is all of that same stuff is there for pretty much any major religion, like especially. And I'm probably going to get flack for saying this, because I want to be really clear. Like, I'm not anti-Muslim. I'm not like making a case just about them. I'm saying Christians have a ton of just evil, heinous shit in their history. And so does Islam. Like, so much murder, so much enslavement, so much, there's even some like pedophilia stuff in there with Muhammad. Like, there's some bad stuff there. So whenever I hear a musician going against that stuff, I'm kind of like, I get it, because they're anti-religion. Like this happened with everybody was going after Take, and we're talking about a dude who performs with an upside down cross tattooed on his chest, but then people are mad that he made some comments about Muhammad in his lyrics. And I'm like, do you not understand that this is a dude that hates religion? He does not like organized religion. And guess what? Islam is an organized religion, just like Christianity is. And it's a huge one. Like, it's, I believe it's the second largest religion in the world. And so to act like it's like singling out a particular community it rings false to me. It really does. And I'm like, if somebody's against religion, they should be free to be against any and all religions, because they've all, I mean, if we're going by the text, the Jews killed Jesus. So, I mean, there's some problems there too. So, so that's, and I feel the need to be absolutely clear on this. I'm not singling out any particular group. I'm saying that in the case of religion, I think everyone should be fair game, including the religion that I've chosen to follow through most of my life, Christianity. Like, I listen to a lot of anti-Christian music because, I find it interesting. I find it to be oftentimes good music, and I find my own messages in it. And I'm not out there to like tell people like, oh, you shouldn't say that, you shouldn't do that. I'm 100% against that, even about stuff that's like personal to my own life. I think people should be free to express that, as long as they're not going out and, actually engaging in acts against those people. But they're free to be angry with it and frustrated with it, just like, Nurgle being in Poland with some of the crazy kind of connections between the Catholic Church and the government and how restrictive they are. I think Nurgle has every right to be angry at that religion to the point of talking about feeding them to the lions. I get it.
Yeah, I'm just kind of, I guess, in that stance too, where I'm just like anti-religion in general. So many things are carried out in the name of religion that are just terrible, and we do it to each other. And I can't see a reason in believing something based on an imaginary person in the sky, no matter what religion it is. It's all someone imaginary that supposedly existed to just put morals on us. And like, I can be a moral person without religion. Like, I don't need it to be a moral person. So that's just kind of like where I'm at on it. And I think,
and there are people out there like Sam Harris and stuff that are making that argument, and I think that's a valid point. My point is always just, there's good and bad people in anything. There's good and bad police officers. There's good and bad Christians. There's good and bad Muslims. There's good and bad teachers. There's good and bad counselors. I work with both. And, like, to generalize about any group of people is silly to me.
Yeah. And I try not to, but I just know, like, personally for me, religion is not a thing. And I even had a guest on recently. It's an episode that's not out yet, but he is in a religious band, and I kind of grew up in that scene of like that religious kind of metalcore movement. So I was like a part of that for a long time and like was into it. But then, I just kind of did my own research and decided it wasn't for me anymore. Yeah. And it didn't mean that I didn't want to support those bands or enjoy those bands. I mean, again, let's just go back to As Lay Dying. Look at what they started out as. They were a religious band. I don't know how much they are anymore.
Well, from my understanding from interviews too, like they never truly were. It was all very, and I think that ties into, I think that hurt Christianity even more, because a lot of those bands came out and said that they were more or less kind of just using it as a stepping stone and never really believed in it. And I'm like, well, that's kind of fucked up.
Yeah, there's a lot of bands that did that. I remember it being like a big, I guess, thing back in the day. The two that come to my mind were Agony Scene and He Is Legend. They were like on those Christian metal labels, and then once they kind of blew up, they got off and were like, yeah, that was just a ploy to kind of get our name out there. And I can't really fault them on it. Like, it's kind of shitty, but also like you
kids.
Have to hustle. Yeah,
they were kids. Like, I always think that is a very important argument in all these cases, is that you're thinking, rational, constructive, planning ahead, non-impulsive part of your brain is not really developed till you're about 25. So up until that point, you're basically like a brain damaged human being. Like, you're not making good decisions, and we have to account for that on some level.
Yeah. I don't know. It's a weird thing, man, especially now, just with the whole metal scene. I feel like we're always under this weird microscope. Yeah. And, because it's such an aggressive genre, people look at it when something like that does happen. They're like, oh, see, that's why metal's weird and gross and stupid, because you guys have Satan worshipers and murderers and, sexual assaulters. And I think that's kind of a misnomer, because a lot of guys that I know and have met, they're like the nicest, chillest dudes in the world.
Yeah.
It's just a few people that get accused of that stuff that make it look bad for the rest of us.
Yeah, it's literally a few bad apples spoil the bunch, that whole idea. And so I agree with like not just allowing it to persist and, noticing it when it's going on and having the discussion. I just feel like the solution that a lot of people have jumped to in order to, because I think they have good intentions. I think a lot of these people are looking at it that way and are seeing it as, well, we want to show everybody that we don't want those people in our community. We want our community to be a better place. But I think the solution that they've come to make that happen is a fundamentally bad one that is not going to work, for one, and two is potentially going to make the problem worse. And then the fallout, I think, is that everybody has this feeling of kind of walking on eggshells. I can't count how many times now I've had like off the record moments with bands, and also like I was at a show and I talked to the tour manager, and I have all these moments where we're not being recorded and people feel comfortable talking about that stuff, and people are feeling it strongly, and it's making, I don't think it's fixing the problem. I think it's, from what I've heard from different people, it is making it worse.
So two things I wanted to kind of bring up real quick is, one, there is a website that is like, I feel like they're just putting on a witch hunt for all these things. Like,
I think I know which website. I think everybody listening probably knows which website.
Yeah, I'm not gonna say it. Yeah. Everybody kind of knows, and it's stupid that they're doing that, because it's the only way they can get traffic to their website right now.
And in fact, that tour manager specifically talked about this website, if we're thinking of the same one. And they even said that none of the bands would do interviews with them because of that. And they're just so sick of it.
And the other thing, too, you'd mentioned this earlier about, I was trying to get it out, but we kind of got off track. But you were talking about like false accusations and stuff like that. And I think there are a couple cases that come to my mind that maybe weren't necessarily false accusations, but they were things that happened that got worked out. One being Jeff Whitehead from Leviathan, and that band Gaza had some things kind of happen with assaults. And, Gaza just pretty much changed their name to Cult Leader, and that's who they are now. Yeah. Better band, in my opinion.
That last album was the shit.
Oh, God, so good. But I think whatever happened with them, their situation got worked out. And same thing with Jeff Whitehead. Like, I think it was just one of those domestic cases where police got involved and nothing, from what I understand, really happened. And everybody speaks very, very highly of Jeff. And, I follow him on social media, and he seems like a cool dude.
Yeah.
But I don't know.
I've been wanting to interview him, actually, because I believe he lives in this area, in the like Portland, Washington area somewhere. So I need to track him down.
Yeah, a guest that I had on, Brendan Sloan, like he's very kind of conscious about these things too, and he's a pretty staunch defender of Jeff Whitehead. And anytime somebody brings up like his assault thing, he's like, no, I've talked to him many times. Like he is not that guy. Like what you guys know isn't the whole thing. And I'm like, you know what? That's kind of all I need to know. And same thing, he defended Deathspell Omega. He's like, yeah, you know, Mikko is kind of problematic, but I think that this record is exactly kind of what you said, that it's kind of like a satirical look on all these other things and not necessarily about his beliefs as far as like race and religion and all that stuff. So and then there's other things he talks about that he kind of goes a little too far, and I'm like, Brendan, chill out. That's not true.
Yeah. And then you're there to have that conversation and challenge each other, which is good. And I mean, and adding on to that too, of course, there's always the chance that you just don't know. Because how many times have we heard, you know, somebody say about a serial killer, like, oh, they lived next door. I had no idea. They were the nicest person. Like, I never would have guessed it. So, like, you know, you never can know. But that's the thing. Like, you never can know. So I feel like it's best to just treat people right and give them some, not necessarily the benefit of the doubt, but just the opportunity to speak and come forward and talk those things out instead of trying to, you know, stuff them down in a corner somewhere. And that's, I think the other important thing you said was that, you know, he said, like, there are things you don't know about the situation. And I think that's so much the case in so many situations where I don't like to pile on as a result. So, like, I will specifically review an album and not even comment on the controversy in certain situations because I'm just like, I don't know. I wasn't there. I'm not involved in the court proceedings. I'm not privy to that information. So I'm not going to add on to potentially misinformation when I'm just Joe Schmo who doesn't know what the fuck they're talking about. I'm just going to, and then some people choose to take it even further and say, like, okay, I'm not even going to touch this band or review this band anymore because I don't know and I don't want to be associated. And that's perfectly fine too. But just for me personally, like, I'm just going to continue to review the music and talk to people and try to stay the fuck out of it for the most part. And then when somebody's convicted, like dude from Lost Prophets again, then by all means, I'm like, wow, that is beyond awful. And that person got what was coming to them. But at the same time, I just don't want to. I think people are so quick to think that they are good at reading minds and know each other and can just insinuate what kind of person somebody is from just, you know, hearing about them online and whatever. And social media has really amplified that and put a megaphone to it. But the fact is, we're terrible at it. Like, research shows this. We are awful at judging each other. And if we just kind of spent more time working on ourselves and asking more questions, then we'd probably be in a better place.
That is very true. I see a lot of comments of people like judging stuff without knowing the people. Case in point, like,
people love a pile on.
Yeah, my buddies in Carnifex, you know, they just put out a new song with Alyssa from Arch Enemy, and they're like, oh, are they all going to be vegan now?
That song is fucking rad too. I saw that music video. It's so good. But anyways, go ahead.
Not even knowing that Fred and Scott are both vegan. So it's like, she's going to totally turn two vegans already vegan. I mean, Scott's like straight edge vegan. He's like the most healthy dude in that band. So it's like, they're just talking about stuff they don't even know based on, you know, Alyssa's agenda of veganism and stuff. But I don't know, I guess like sometimes I do that too, so again, I'm like a hypocrite.
We all do it. I mean, I always try to, when I do it, I try to preface it by saying, like, I'm not here to throw rocks at glass houses, because I totally recognize that I am imperfect. I'm not always right. Sometimes I get things completely wrong. What I know now I may learn in 5 years is completely wrong. So, like, I'm open to that. And, you know, at the same time, I try to temper it as much as I can, because what it really is, it's like slot machine learning. Like, we've developed this reward system in our brains where, it, like I said, with you know, kicking the kid out, where you see somebody who's you perceive as your enemy down on their luck, and it feels good temporarily to kind of pile onto that and laugh about it. And, that's why on YouTube it's so popular to like have those ownage compilation videos where, this side's getting owned or this side's getting owned, because you're literally getting like this, the reward center of your brain is lighting up and it feels good. And it takes us out of like, whatever shit we're dealing with at that time. But ultimately it's got this toxicity to it and it kind of seeps into everything. And what hurts me the most about it as it pertains to this podcast is how much I see it fracturing a community that I've always seen as, never perfect and not without its elitists and its problems and whatever, but it was always for me a place where I could go to seek comfort and meet people with similar interests and form friendships and alliances and, just feel good and feel like I was a part of something. And so to see it getting further and further subdivided, and again, like I had a band say this off the record, like, I like how they put it too. They all laughed and they were like, you know what? We're already in this like little niche community that's like so far separated from everything else and is so small already. Why are we like trying to fracture it even further into like smaller and smaller groups instead of like banding together and like helping each other out? I'm like, yeah, that's how I see it too, man. It makes me sad, honestly. And it's a bummer.
Yeah, I agree with you on that. I can't, I guess can't really think of a better way to maybe close it out.
Yeah.
I think that's a good sentiment. I don't know if we necessarily got to the bottom of our original conceit here, but regardless, I think it was a good conversation. We weren't like, even though we had opposing views, we weren't like, no, you're wrong, which is good because I think that nobody's wrong. I think we just kind of feel and think what we want to feel and think.
Yeah. And then we both get to walk away from this and absorb what the other person said. And maybe that informs future decisions. Maybe it doesn't, whatever. But I really value this. And I think this is the best way to go about those things. And so, I'm glad too. I'd like to do another one on, maybe we should do one on religion, honestly, because we started talking about that and I'm like, man, that is a whole other podcast right there. But
I know.
In any case, I really enjoyed this. I was honestly, to be frank, I was a little nervous going into it because we don't really know each other. So I'm like, shit, is this going to turn into like an argument? Are we going to, have some problems here? But no, I really appreciated it.
No, I'm pretty chill with stuff like that. Again, it's like you were saying, I just like to have conversations. And if I disagree, I'll try and figure out that person's perspective. And I won't even tell them they're wrong because I don't necessarily think that person's wrong. I don't know.
Yeah. I don't know, man. You called me out on Instagram pretty hard. No, no, I'm just kidding.
Hey,
no, I think that's good. Like, I like the way you did it too, because you let it be known your position on it, but you didn't like shame me. You didn't be like, you're a Nazi too. And do that whole thing. You're just kind of like, hey, I think there's stuff you don't know that you should be aware of. And it did inspire me to go check some stuff out, which did inform kind of my future thinking about Mikko in particular, but maybe also about the band and just about my own, thoughts on this. So I appreciate that. I think it's good to have those differences of opinion. I just don't like it when it becomes
awareness. Yeah,
awareness as opposed to literally trying to torch things to the ground.
Trust me, man. When I posted on Twitter about not supporting it, I got fucking lit up by some of the people that do support it, and I was just like, "What did I do here?"
Yeah, and they
didn't care.
They did not care. That's not okay either. And again, that just brings me back to, I don't like the extremes of either side. I don't like people that full on support something and literally like stick their fingers in their ears and go la 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 and like just act like it's not there and then get mad at people for their own opinions on it. And then I also don't like the people on the other side who are like, absolutely not. You cannot post this. You should be kicked off of Twitter or whatever platform, and you shouldn't even have a podcast and whatever. And fortunately, my audience is cool enough, and I actually thanked them for this just the other day, that they're not really like that. Like our audience is small, but they're loyal and they're open. And if they don't like something, they're just kind of like, I'm going to pass on that. And there's not like a bunch of shit talking and arguments and all this kind of stuff. And I really appreciate that. I want to cultivate more of that kind of a community. And so that's part of the reason why I wanted to like connect with other podcasters like yourself. And I really have enjoyed talking with Mathcore Index, and I'm hoping to at some point maybe talk with Dadcore and just let's build something instead of tearing something down.
Yeah, I agree, man. I was trying to do that in the early days of the podcast, bring all these other like metal podcasts together, and nobody wanted to do that. And I was like, all right, that's cool. I get it. Everybody's doing their own thing, but I think that
people don't
we
want
should
to
try
share.
to support each other. Yeah, I get it. But so since we're gonna put these out on our respective channels, where can everybody kind of like follow and find your stuff? Obviously, I'll link to it, but people listening.
Yeah, so the channel's called Metal Trenches. You can find it all on metaltrenches.com, but you can also search for Metal Trenches on YouTube. Really encourage you to subscribe there, because in addition to the podcast, I'm also putting out other reviews and video content, just for fun, like tier ranking videos of bands and genres and things like that. And then you can also find it on iTunes, Castbox, and BitChute as far as the podcast goes. And we also have a mailing list too, which we're on all social media. But I really encourage people to sign up for the mailing list, because as you probably know, Facebook, Twitter, all these places are going down. Their algorithms are garbage for websites now. We get no reach. And so there's a good chance, even if you follow us there, by all means do it. But if you're not like commenting on stuff, you probably won't even see when I'm posting new content. So I personally send out an email every Friday to the mailing list, and that's probably the best way to make sure you don't miss anything.
I never thought about doing that. That might be a good idea.
Yeah, I talked to a dude who recommended it. Yeah, it's slow going because it's kind of old school, but that was something I like about it too, is it just has this sort of DIY kind of punk rock feel to it. So hoping more people jump on that. And then for the people who are listening on my channel, where can they find all of your stuff?
Yeah, so it's all at heavymetalhistorypodcast.com. Like you mentioned, you can find the podcast on iTunes and Spotify and pretty much anywhere else that you listen to podcasts. I put out stuff like once a week. Let's see what else. Yeah, so for whatever reason, all of my social media is all different handles because I can't fit the whole thing into a lot of it, like trying to put in heavy metal history on everything.
Yeah, that's true.
So, yeah. Instagram is Heavy Metal History. Twitter's Heavy Metal Pod, and then the Facebook is Heavy Metal History Podcast. I'm pretty sure that's the other thing is like if you search Heavy Metal History, another podcast comes up.
There's the Heavy Metal Historian, which is who I thought you were at first, and then I was like, oh wait a minute, no, this is a totally different thing.
Yeah, so you have to put in podcast at the end of it, and then it comes up no problem. It's kind of silly. I'm still trying to figure out like how that works and what to do to fix it, but regardless, if you're interested in the historical side of the genre, I encourage you to check out the podcast. That's what I'm all about.
Yeah, I recommend it. I've been enjoying it.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. I've definitely been checking out more of your episodes lately too, now that I'm more aware of it.
Yeah. Well, which ones have you heard?
I went and listened to the Warforged one because I was like, I got to hear what these guys have to say.
Dude, that one was so much fun. I've enjoyed pretty much every episode, but I definitely always recommend that one. I also, the one I did with Matt Moss from Sludge was one of my favorites because we did like 2.5 hours, and dude talked about at a young age getting put in a psych ward for like 3 years in the UK because he was having like paranoid thoughts and delusions and all this crazy stuff. And so from a mental health standpoint, that was super fascinating. Plus Slug just makes some sick melodic death metal about slugs. And then also, I really enjoyed recently, I got with Finn from the Punk Rock MBA YouTube channel, and he just got his silver play button, so he's coming up in the world. But he didn't want to talk about music. He was like, dude, can we talk about literally anything else? Because I'm just like, I talk about music all the time. And so we just did like an hour and 15 minutes just specifically digging into mental health And
Oh, wow.
I really enjoyed that. It's been kind of cool to diversify topics.
Yeah, I tried to do that too. Another little aspect is I'm really into like horror movies and comics, so I think that those two kind of go hand in hand with metal. So
Hell
I've had
yeah.
comic book creators, I've had a horror movie director on. I'm working on trying to get some more now that I've got a contact with him. So if you're into that kind of stuff too, definitely go check that out.
Hell yeah, man. If you ever want to do another collab episode talking about horror movies, I'm all about that shit.
Hell yeah. Absolutely.
I was trying to get I don't know if you've ever heard of Hollow Weekly podcast. They're a specifically horror movie podcast, and I actually reached out to see if that one of the dudes, there's two guys on there, and one of them drops metal references every now and then, and I'm like, this guy might be like a secret metalhead too. So I tried to reach out and see if he would come on, but he hasn't responded. But that's a cool podcast too. Probably enjoy it. I want to pick your brain about the new Suspiria too. I don't know if you watched that.
I have not actually.
Oh,
It's on my list. So actually, do you want to wrap this up?
Yeah. We better
tell you
wrap
off
up. But
air.
yeah, thank you so much for being on here, and I totally would love to do this again sometime. Definitely.
Yeah, absolutely, John. Thank you for doing it, man. I hope that more people listen to both our podcasts because that's what it should be about.
Yep. And that'll do it for this episode of Trench Talk. Hope you enjoyed it. Definitely do check out Heavy Metal History for their excellent podcast. And again, as always, please do subscribe if you haven't already, like the channel, follow us on social media, join the mailing list. And again, please do consider supporting us over at Patreon, especially if you're a regular listener, you feel like you're getting added value out of the content. Think of us as that weekly zine that you used to get to your door back in the day, if you're old enough to remember when that was a normal thing. But yeah, you can even just $1 a day. $1 a day, that would be sweet. No, $1 a month would make all the difference, honestly. But that's it for now. Thanks as always for listening. This is Flight of Icarus signing off. I will see you in the trenches.